Hey, I'm going to respond to some comments from yesterday, one in particular having to do with research, for instance, on polygamy. So I'm going to call this Mormon Polygamy Research Methods, Objectivity in Black, and the Wizardry of Anti-Mormonism. Yes, we've got some symbolism there, don't we, in the picture? Okay, so without any further ado, let's take a look at my Objectivity in Black. Kind of like Nativity in Black, a song from Black Sabbath that I kind of like. My name is Lucifer, please take my hand, and I will guide you in the light. Oh, please, Christians, don't run away! Come on, Bubble Popper, you're not afraid of me saying things like that. Okay. Anyway, let's cruise over here to my software, actually, YouTube creation software, because I want to take a look at a couple of these comments here. So, and yeah, we got a lot of good comments. We got like 29 comments on yesterday's video, which was discussing, in some measure, Jonathan Streeter's recent videos of, these horrible things that are going on. The mission president raping that sister missionary and all that sort of thing. The improper interviews and that kind of stuff that's going on this week. And I'm not a change the church guy. I'm a let's destroy the church guy, because the church was founded by evil men to accomplish evil purposes. So it's not corrupt. You can't corrupt something that was born in wickedness. You have to corrupt something that was once good and it was never good. That is my contention. So I do want to see some of these other nice comments, but and thanks for all the people that said, hey, Dodger, here's my tips for helping you get well. It sounds like you're kind of sick. Yesterday, there was like a lot of dust in the air, a lot of dust storms, super cold wind, and I was working outside and at night, and so it's kind of probably a combination of things, but I don't think it's too much of about a pathogen, other than dirt got in my lungs. But thanks for all the good tips and all the naturopathic ideas and so forth. I decided I'd just try some beer this morning. How's that? Anyway. Yeah, pretty bitter stuff. Don't try Sapporo. Dodger Game, you mentioned just reading the journals of these women involved with polygamy in Joseph Smith's time. Where can I or anyone else interested just read these? Oh, this is Mouthy Mormon Mental Health, I think. It looks like it's cut off there. Where can I or anyone else read? Anyone else who's interested, just read these journals to do unbiased research. Unbiased, that's kind of a dream, but well, I'll comment on that in a sec here. Where, asterisk, I am skeptical of, say, both your opinions and the church authorities. He's talking about like me versus Brian Hales, for instance, and want to know just what these women thought themselves about what was going on and how it affected their lives. Could you please provide tips on where to start, I'm sure, just so that lay people, hey, I'm a lay people too, dude, I just, or girl, I'm not even sure what you're, anyway, I'm just a lay person that studied a lot. I spent a lot of time. I'm not super smart or anything. I'm reasonably bright, I think, but I've spent an enormous amount of time studying, like in the middle of the night for like 40 years, and so not just this, but a lot of things that make the world turn, although I don't think the world turns, actually. Just so that lay people can read and judge for themselves whether men like you or Brian Hales are full of garbage. And I'm going to read an additional comment from this person, because it kind of goes along with this. And I was just looking at it, so where the heck is it? Okay. Yes, I put some lyrics from Uriah Heep in there about the wizard. Pigs that fly. I couldn't find this yesterday. Thanks. I'm glad this didn't disappear. He says, I yearn for the day this perverted cult is forced to shut its MLM outlets, known as steakhouses and ward houses, for lack of interest. It takes a lot of courage to do what you do. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, WPF. Anyway, there's a lot of people I wanted to read. Bubble Popper had some good things. A lot of people did. Tom Miller helped me get well. Well, I didn't do your stuff, Tom. I did the opposite. I drank some iced coffee full of refined white sugar. And it didn't help, I'm sure. I wanted to read the additional comment that the same person made, but gosh darn it, I saw it earlier. So anyway, here it is. Good. To respond to your contention in around the 6-minute mark, I found that just researching Mormon history on my own is very biased. So the reason I'm reading this is I'm going to respond to this question and share some information about my thoughts on researching some of these things. And this particularly was mentioning Brian Hales, and so he's Mr. Defend Mormon polygamy, plural marriage, and all that sort of a thing. So I'm going to talk about some methodology that I've used, some places that I've looked, and how I try to view things. To respond to your contention in the 6-minute mark, I found that just researching Mormon history on my own is very biased. And you can just go and to such and such websites that reference these various quotes. A few days ago, Brian Hales responded to Zelf on the Shelf and supposedly debunked or claimed to them how they misreferenced their quotes. Is this a he said, she said version of Mormon history? Although it sounds to me that polygamy in Nauvoo makes these are the days of our lives. Hey, how about the world turns? As the world turns or as the stomach turns? Come on. Seem like a cartoon for kindergartners. If going to your biased websites with your biased quotes convince me that they are full of crap, how can I know that they may validly be saying the same thing about you? So, hey, this is a fair enough question, isn't it? Thanks. Mouthy Mormon mental health. I guess you just ran out of character space there to put health. Okay. Could be mouthy mental heathenism. Yeah, we shouldn't assume that, should we? I hate the term mental health, actually. I think the pharmaceutical industry uses it so that they can label anything and everything as a syndrome that can be treated with a pharmaceutical. All right, great. So I'm going to talk about methodology for analyzing material that I've read and what I've noticed about guys like Brian Hales, the evil Mormon apologist. Because it's important to understand mind control techniques. It's important to divide fact, if we can get actual fact, from opinion. And it's important to understand that we should not fall for a lot of these tactics that are used by the apologists, these false premises, these these fake rules that they try to guide us into, because they frame arguments in such a way as to put you in a place where you can't come to a conclusion on something. Like in the Joseph Smith story, it was impossible for anyone as young and unacquainted with men and things to come to any certain conclusion or something like that on these things. And at last I decided to ask of God, which is exactly what the Gospel Topics essays do. That's what they tell us to do. They lead us in circles. They're full of diversion, and then they say, we really just can't figure this out. We've got to have faith. And if you're worthy, you'll get the right answer when you pray. They inevitably tend to lead to that conclusion. And my contention is that that's not true, because we do have ample facts. And mouthy Mormon mental whatever said, you know, you saw I'm referencing something around minute 6 there, because I talked about you know, reaching these, shit, I don't even remember what I thought about anymore. I just lost my train of thought. Okay, so we're going to go to some things here, okay? I want to be aware of how they do things. So he mentions Brian Hale's debunking or attempting to debunk self on the shelf. He said, she said, all that kind of stuff. And so how do we divide these things? What are some good sources to use? That sort of thing. And, all right, so I'm going to go into Puffin here. And I've got some websites already open. You know, I've already done a little preparation here, so this isn't just a full-on rant. If I'm having a lot of trouble with this new phone. Okay, it keeps turning off the data. I do not know why. So let's go back. Reconnecting. Okay. I will not use bad language that Mormons don't like right now when I'm feeling frustrated. Okay. Brian Hale, Self on the Shelf. I have not read the thing, but what I've noticed is that the tactics of the Mormon apologists are to use character assassination, find some fault with the person or with something that they've written, something that they've done, anything that they can do to discredit. And then what they do is they say, now we can't trust anything that they say. Well, you don't need to trust, but it doesn't mean that you can't say, they say now nothing that they say is true, basically, is what they try to lead us to, which is along the same types of mind control lines as what we are experiencing when we hear, well, these men are men of God, and so whatever they say, we should believe them. Okay? And what I'm saying is that we need to evaluate the information for what it is. A while back, I read something where Jeremy Rennells is going back and forth with Fair Mormon and saying, they find some fault with him. He said, people called me a deaf retard, and I don't care if I'm a deaf retard or not. Evaluate the information. Yep, he's completely right. Doesn't matter if he's a deaf retard. Okay, obviously he's partially deaf and he's not a retard, and there's no reason to call retarded people anything derogatory. It's not their fault that they have thinking problems. So whoever said that is obviously pretty insensitive, and we need to evaluate information objectively. So let's look at them more. I'm gonna sprinkle these in here, so I'm not gonna lay out the whole bibliography at one time. Mormon Think is a really good resource of a website, and one of the reasons that it's good, this is made mostly by LDS people, many of whom, I don't know how many people there, but my take on it is these are people that studied LDS history. They are LDS, and some of them still go to church, or some of them did go to church. When I used to read this stuff, I don't really use this website anymore. I think Christians bought it, and I think it's biased probably then. I think Grant Palmer got a hold of it or something, but maybe I'm wrong. At any rate, what they did do was they would present what Fair Mormon had to say. They'd present the problem, the concern, the issue that challenges the authority claims of the church, the assertion that an all-knowing, unchanging, and perfect God guides the church through, decent guys that are inspired of God, because, they try really hard to be good. And they present both people's arguments. If the Fair Mormon's got something, if the church has something, the church never does, but now they do in the Gospel Topics essays, they'll show it and they'll put links to it, and then they'll say, okay, here's the other side of it, and maybe they'll have some references there and some quotes. So This is a good. Yeah, I've found Mormon Think to be a good resource. It's apparently good enough that it's blocked on the Wi-Fi in chapels, and Mormon LD, in the chapels they block Mormon Think is what I heard. So it's a good website. Another good website, besides mine, Sandra Tanner, or Sandra and Gerald, who has passed away. Tanner, yes, they're evil anti-Mormons, right? Well, they're not evil people, and so people try to try to discredit them, or find something that they made a mistake on, and then trash their character and say that nothing they say is true. And probably almost everything that they say that is based in fact or something is going to be true. They did turn into born again Christians, so you might find some opinions based on their line of thinking, their theological point of view. But so what's their website called? What is it? Utah Lighthouse Ministry, I believe. UTLM. They've got a tremendous amount of data. Yeah, I could just go to all these, but I'm not, I guess. They've got a lot of stuff. They got a lot of good information on Brigham Young and his wives and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of good research. You might find stuff that you will find pertinent material. And when we look at what people have to say, everybody's got an opinion. By the time people are writing these things, they're going to have a point of view. I'm going to have a point of view, yes, but that doesn't mean that I have to present things falsely or try to be deceptive like they do on LDS.org and Fair Mormon, especially LDS.org, actually, which I've demonstrated some of the videos on the Gospel Topics essays. They deliberately try to mislead us. Mormon Think does not do that. The Tanners don't do that. I may not agree on their personal view on theology, but as they present factual information regarding Mormonism, UTLM is a good website. Richard Packman, he was LDS for a long time. Packham, not Packman. Packham, Richard Packham. Google him. He's got a website. He's documented a lot of things about the dishonesty of Mormon leaders. I use some of his material in one of my videos on people like Joseph Fielding Smith, who lies through his teeth in like Essentials in Mormon History and all stuff like that, church history. Other good websites, maybe like Ask Gramps, josephsmith.com, olivercowdery.com, sydneyrigdon.com. If you can get to the original journals, there's a lot in those kind of websites. I apologize, but my brain was partially fried by not against my will, and I did a lot of this study prior to that occurring. So sometimes it's difficult for me to recall certain information, and so reading right in the journals of people, and one of the things that I like to note is just because it's someone's journal, they still could be opining, rather than offering fact necessarily. But one of the interesting things that I've noted, if I read various different people's journals or statements that they have made, and we have a quote as to where they've made it, especially if one of them is like loyal to Brigham Young or Joseph Smith and they stayed that way, or were at the time that they made the statement, and it's corroborating something that someone who took offense to Joseph Smith's, hitting on their wife, trying to tell her that she needed to be one of his spiritual wives while they're, out of town on business or on a mission or whatever it was. Kind of thing that happened to, Jane Law, William Law's wife, or Sarah Pratt when Orson Pratt was on a mission, or Orson Hyde's wife, and she gave in to Joseph Smith. Sarah Pratt told him to take a hike to hell, go find some other girl that wanted to give it up. Nancy Rigdon, daughter of Sidney Rigdon. I mean, he didn't have to go far. He stayed right within the inner circle of the LDS leadership and had the gall to go after the wives and daughters of apostles. Not that I think these guys were, kind of, the whole apostle thing, but these were leaders in the church, and some of them were righteous people. William Law appears to have been a good, righteous man, William and Jane Law. They were very good for the image of Mormonism, which is why some people think they were, William Law was brought into the first presidency and didn't have a clue for a while. He wasn't in Joseph's inner circle, even though he was in the first presidency. He was eye candy, for the image of the church, because he had a great reputation. He was a physician that had a very reputation for honesty and integrity, and he continued to have that type of reputation after he denounced Joseph Smith for his adultery and his attempts on his wife. Sidney Rigdon, I think he was a scoundrel like Joseph Smith, but he was not an adulterer that I'm aware of. He was not all about this polygamous stuff. So, what is called polygamous? Joseph Smith, in my opinion, was not a polygamist. I have no evidence that he was a polygamist. I have evidence that he was an adulterer and was leading basically an organized crime ring using religion as a front. That's what my research has led me to believe. So, when we look at what these people say, if you've got Sarah Pratt saying something about how Joseph Smith approached her, and you've got Joseph H. Jackson saying something, and you've got Nancy Rigdon saying something, and you've got these various other girls that he has been involved with saying something, or you're talking about the Danites, and Joseph Jackson's talking about it, but then you've got a Danite talking about it, saying the same things, who remained loyal to Brigham all his life and died for doing what he apparently believed in doing, which also involved obeying, his priesthood leaders, right down to massacring women and children in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. And I'm talking about John Doyle Lee. And so he was loyal to Brigham Young. Joseph H. Jackson went undercover to discover the horrors of what was going on with this human trafficking, basically, in Nauvoo, with the spiritual wife system and the hundreds of women being used as sexual timeshares by Joseph Smith and his buddies. But they both tell you, things that tend to be corroborating. And Sarah Pratt, a wife of an apostle, who finally, she went to Utah, the whole thing, but she finally said, I've had enough of this crap. My husband's just like doing these young girls all the time, and Mormonism and polygamy ruined him. And so Mormon polygamy is not about Joseph Smith. It's about Brigham Young and the boys. It's not about Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith ran the spiritual wife system. He was a wretched individual, but he wasn't doing polygamy. He was doing as many women as he possibly could, but he talked them into bed with the Hosea chapter 3 doctrine. And Joseph H. Jackson's sworn testimony, his affidavit, as another very good read. Google anything you can on Sarah Pratt, and you may come up to various websites, IRR, Mormon Curtain, who knows. But if you can get to, what they've got there, quotes, and then the footnotes and bibliography, then you can go find where you're going to see that. Mormon apologists like to frame things in a certain way to keep the argument for damage control. That's what I would have to say, damage control. And one of the damage control methods is to frame the argument. So they don't want to talk about the spiritual wife system. For God's sakes, don't want to talk about that. So they frame things having to do with what they call plural marriage, and they say these are wives of Joseph Smith. Wives. They like to use the term wives, like Fanny Alger, his first plural wife, they said. Well, he knocked her up when she was like 16, 1833, 10 years before. We've got section 132. Let's keep in mind section 132. Section 132. It's in 1843, and Joseph Smith said it didn't exist. He denied it existed. It was just something for his inner circle, according to Sarah Pratt. So read what Sarah Pratt has to say. He says he was just chucking women into bed, and that came in handy with them. But in public, he denied it existed. So the apologists say, well, they had to keep it confidential. Oh, you mean you had to freaking lie about it? So what about, we believe in being honest, true, chaste, virtuous. I mean, God. There's nothing in, they violate every single thing in that. So, yeah, here I got the website, and I got all kinds of these chapters on everything except, as we look down here, these are the ones that are, hyperlinked, and the ones that are brighter are not hyperlinked. So, women, whiskey, and wine, and a few dozen more women. That will be the polygamy one, so I actually don't have that up yet as I'm making this, but I wanted to respond to this individual. So we'll have both videos and written material here, but secret combinations, Danites. I did do a reading of the Joseph H. Jackson. You can find it online, but I read it. It's not my best reading, but the tiny screen and stuff, but and a little bit of commentary on it. So there we go. Once again, we have to discern what is fact, or what is being corroborated from various witnesses and diaries, especially when they have divergent viewpoints. It makes it, I think, helpful. It's kind of like connecting points, geometrically from different different positions. That's how you can gain. Like with a GPS, you got two different references, north, south, east, west, and that's how you get that sort of a thing to happen. So, let me see. Let's look at some of the websites I had open because I did it for a reason. Okay, Brian Hales, basically he's going to attack the credibility of Zelf on the Shelf. There's my website. There's my website. Mormon Think, talked about that. Books on Mormon Polygamy. There we go. Books on Mormon Polygamy. So they try to keep it within. So we got the Mormon Enigma. And one that is pretty popular is In Sacred Loneliness by Todd Compton. And so that goes along with the kind of thing that you're going to find on a website, like except for they got detailed stuff on each one of these 30 some women. So like a third of them were kind of young, girls. A third of them were other dudes' wives, like about 11 or so. And then they got the balance. So roughly that's kind of how it goes. And one of the websites that really kind of woke me up to what was going on with this isn't the spiritual wife system. That's like the ugliest thing that ever happened. It's like the sickest thing ever. But I gotta shut up here real quick. The Wives of Joseph Smith. Okay. Here we go. Wives of Joseph Smith. Excuse me. Remembering the Wives of Joseph Smith. So this is put together. Some Christians did this, I think. Okay, so once again, if you've been programmed by the brethren to say, okay, well that's an unreliable source, like they say in the Gospel Topics essays, everybody else is unreliable except for LDS.org, which we can rely on to lie to us. Just because they're Christian doesn't mean that you should discount everything that they say, because we think all Christians are rabid anti-Mormons parroting propaganda. Sure, some of them do. They're like Jedi Mormon for the other side, and they're like, Joseph Smith was a con man and a pedophile. Well, I can't say that's not true. He's definitely a con man. But was he a pedophile? Well, depends on what you believe as what pedophilia is, and what you think happened with 14-year-old girls. Like Heber Kimball's daughter. Okay, so this says the Wives of Joseph Smith, and so this is so you can read a lot of information on here. And what you got to be careful of, especially with the apologists, is look for adjectives. They just soak you with adjectives to constantly, always use negative associations. The church is good. Anti-Mormons are evil. God is good. The devil is evil. If you follow the brethren, you're faithful. Faithful means good, like a faithful husband as opposed to an adulterer. Okay, faithful. That's a positive reference. If you don't like the brethren, you're just negative. You're a critic. If you look at how powerful the use of language is, you will find the adjectives that are constantly used by the apologists are there to discredit. It's anti-Mormon propaganda. Propaganda is a good word for advertising, in Latin America. But in the United States, propaganda, what do we think? Communist propaganda. It's all lies. So these are associations we make in our mind, and they use all these types of tactics because the facts don't support them. So this is a good website. Emma Hale, Fanny Alger, what is she? She's 16 years old. Joseph, she's the maid. She's the nanny. She's the nanny. And Emma Smith, caught her, and Joe was doing her in the barn. And she wound up pregnant. I don't know if it was from that time or another time, but Emma threw her out in the middle of the night. In the middle of the night, pregnant. She's 17 then. Did the Lord God command this? The God of Israel just wanted Joe to knock up the nanny so that she could have a baby, on her own, and then marry some other dude and live in Indiana, because that's restoring the way of the Lord. I mean, does that really make sense? And another thing I wanted to mention is, say, when you talk about mouthy Mormon mental health, whatever person, when you say, who's credible here? Well, what is Brian Hale saying? His whole thing is, you can't prove Joe screwed the maid. That's his whole thing. You can't prove that Joe screwed the other dude's wives. It's just dynastic. He's stealing their wives for all eternity. Some of them are on missions faithfully serving the God of Israel. And you come back and find out you've lost your family for all eternity to this bastard. Cool, huh? The other thing, of course, I've said it so many times, the marriage contract. It has terms. It's a legally binding contract. Emma agreed to marry Joseph Smith on those terms, the terms of a mutually exclusive relationship, monogamy. So Joseph Smith is violating the terms of that contract, which are supposed to be sacred. Plus, they're legally binding. So God's telling him to go out and, just get all these other women. And so whether they're little girls or other dudes' wives or whatever, he's violating his own marriage contract, which Section 132 says is valid until he's dead. And so did the section that he put in, or the other guys put it, whatever, Sidney Rigdon or Cowdery put in there, whatever, around 1835, and Joseph Smith left it in there, and seemed to have a stamp of approval. It's in there till like 1872. Said you can't remarry unless your spouse is dead. You don't go hooking up with somebody else. And adultery is the only thing that Jesus supposedly said was just cause for divorce. If you remarry after being divorced for anything other than adultery, you're committing adultery. It's Matthew chapter 5, Luke 16, 3 Nephi 12. But Joe's screwing all these other checks, and he's violating the terms of his marriage contract, which Section 132 says is of full force until he's dead. And Emma. So, God has no integrity based on that. So Brian Hales tries to divert us to something where we can't have anything conclusive, so you can just pray to find out if you feel good about this shit. Excuse me. Alright, so here's all these women. These are the ones that the church pretty much admit to. So they call some of these women wives. I think they've reduced it to 24. I think they were up at like 33. I'm not sure they got Fanny Alger on there anymore. So Another website, Family Search. It's a church-owned website. Use LDS.org, but notice the difference between fact and fiction. Notice the difference between fact and opinion and all the adjectives that are used a lot of times, and notice, fact check it. A good example of fact checking on LDS.org, besides the Gospel Topics essays where they say things like, black skin isn't a sign of divine disfavor or a curse. When you look at the Book of Mormon, it says, God cursed the Lamanites with a skin of blackness because he was mad at them and they were bad. Or, you know, the Canaanites turned black so everyone could despise them after they killed the people of Shem. I mean, God put a mark on them, on the people, on the Lamanites, and cursed them with a sore cursing. How can they say that? They just lie, and then they just don't show what it says in the Book of Mormon. Same thing they do with the DNA thing, saying that, you know, that they weren't the only people there when promised them that they would be. Not to mention the flood of Noah should have washed away the American Indians that came over long before Adam, but somehow missed them, and they're there to disappear into, so that we don't worry about why we can't find any Lamanite DNA or something. Or tiny, tiny bits of somebody from Israel at some time, the Middle East, you know, like 30,000 years ago, to find Genesis once again. So, what about looking at, you know, the first vision, apologetics there, and we're reading, was it apologetics, or was it, he's saying that Joseph was such a truthful boy, and he references, you know, William Law said that, you know, that's why we should believe him. And then you look and you check out there, and it's not a hyperlink, but you Google it and you find that reference. There's a book, and it's got 4 different times William Law, Joseph's brother, talked about Joseph's first vision. And it was never in 1820, and it never had God the Father in it. 4 different times he said Joe started, you know, searching for spiritual things in 1823. It doesn't corroborate what it's pretending to corroborate in the footnotes right there on LDS.org, telling us why we should believe the Joseph Smith first vision story as it is written. As it's written. So I recommend fact checking, because you'll find lots of deception on LDS.org. That's a great thing to look at. The scriptures are filled with contradiction, you know? Yeah. Ether chapter 3. Jesus tells the brother of Jared he's both God the Father and Jesus Christ. And he tells him he's the first guy that's ever seen him. And it's like, you know, 1,000 years after Moses chapter 7 when he's doing the same damn thing with Enoch. Except we're not making magic stones. Okay. So here's all these girls. And you can read about each one on here and find, you know, Miranda Hyde. This shows us a wife of Joseph Smith. This is Orson Hyde's wife. The dude's on a mission to, like, you know, dedicate the land to Israel, I think, at that time. Durfee, she's a nasty woman. She was one of his his captains or whatever. They're like the women Danites. Yeah, Patty Bartlett Sessions. Okay, where were we? Oh, yeah. So, Miranda Hyde, an apostle's wife, and Joe's doing her while the husband's gone. Of course, Brian Hells will say, he didn't do her. Well, he stole her for eternity, Brian. You gonna argue that one? 15-year-old Miranda Johnson and her family were baptized. Okay. In 1833, Miranda met and courted Orson Hyde. So we got the whole story here. And so we're not talking about all the details here. We're talking about how to find this stuff. So, you know, here we've got, like, Orson Hyde wrote, I was appointed in company with Elder John E. Page to go on a mission to Jerusalem. A week later, Orson left for what would be a 3-year mission. On October 14, 1841, Orson stood on the Mount of Olives and consecrated Palestine for the gathering of Judah in the last days. While Orson was gone, Miranda, his wife, had to live in a little log house whose windows had no glass, but in place which were pieces of greased paper, a little cornmeal, few groceries, and provisions remaining, little ones. Okay, so that's quoted out of somewhere. Noting Miranda's conditions, Joseph Smith received the following revelation. Verily, thus saith the Lord unto my servant Joseph, that inasmuch as you've called upon me to know my will concerning my handmaid Nancy Miranda Hyde, behold, it is my will that she should have a better place prepared for her than that which she now lives. And let my handmaid Nancy Miranda Hyde hearken unto the counsel of my servant Joseph in all things whatsoever he shall teach unto her. Alright, so, as we go along, we'll find Joseph Smith. However, by March, Orson had learned about plural marriage himself and married 2 additional wives. Okay, so Miranda soon moved to a better home. In the spring of 1842, she married Joe. In Joseph's diary is a list of his marriages. It includes Miranda Johnson to Joseph Smith. 8 months later, in December, Orson returned from his mission. So, the girl is married to Orson Hyde. He's an apostle going on a mission, and while he's gone, Joe steals his wife. Okay, so, see if they got a bibliography down here. References. So, look at the references and see what they got. FamilySearch.org. Okay, it's a church-owned website. Mormon Polygamy, a History. Mormon Enigma, written by Emma Hale Smith. In Sacred Loneliness, that's Todd Compton's book. The Plural Wives of Joseph Smith, Doctrine and Covenant. So, these are some good resources to go to when you're researching. I don't like to call it polygamy. This isn't polygamy. And this is illegal. How can that be a marriage? It's illegal in that state, in every state Joseph Smith was in. You can't legally marry them. So by what, God told him to do it, to break the covenants of his covenants and his wife's covenants. It's nothing but stinking. It's Donald Trump, open marriage crap. I mean, it's like switching partners, do-si-do. It's ridiculous. Musical wives and her husbands. Here's Fanny Alger knocks her up when she's a 16-year-old, has a baby, on her own, and then just marries some other dude. So Joe's not raising this child in church. How in the world does that corroborate anything that how does it go along with raising seed unto the Lord? Any of these BS excuses. You look at the Book of Mormon, Jacob chapter 2, Jacob chapter 3, I think. It condemns what David and Solomon did, having multiple wives and concubines. And D&C 132 says the same 2 dudes are just doing fine. Jesus thinks it's fine now. He thought it was fine then, according to D&C 132. He said, my prophet, in the hand, they're given to David by the hand of my servant Nathan. Completely contradicting the Book of Mormon. So, Jesus talking about David and Solomon, he says they were bad boys, they were whoremongers, abominations, all this stuff about the same 2 dudes doing the same 2 things, doing the same stuff, and then Joe Smith says, no, Jesus said it's all good. Okay, so Jesus is like, he can't make up his mind? Well, wait a minute. No, he's saying he thought it was cool way back then, so he couldn't make up his... Obviously, we've got massive contradiction. It isn't an all-knowing, unchanging God that has some kind of integrity. It's a God that just lies through his teeth and just makes up crap as he goes. And that's how I find a lot of this stuff is comparing the scriptures, comparing the histories, and just see how consistent is it with the theme that an all-knowing, unchanging, just, holy, virtuous, perfect God, rather than a raging, jealous psychomaniac of the Old Testament, guides the church through these criminals. Please read Joseph Jackson's stuff. Sure, you can say, oh, it's no good because he didn't like Joseph Smith. That means he's evil, as you've been conditioned to believe. The facts support the narrative that Joseph Smith and Brigham Young were scum. They were murderers. They had a lot of people killed through those Danites, like Orrin Porter Rockwell or Bill Hickman or Hosea Stout, Clingman-Smith, Haight. I mean, these guys are scum, and they're womanizers. John Taylor, he prints the pamphlet in England saying there's no such thing as polygamy. It's just a big lie. It's just anti-Mormon propaganda, and he's got 12 wives. These dudes are liars. All you got to do is do the research. So hopefully some of these places will be helpful in Googling these particular topics, and then differentiate between adjectives used by church apologists and, you know, original source material, and if it's, you know, and don't listen when the anti-Mormon guy, the anti-Mormon, when the apologists, they say, oh, they just try to all they do is try to discredit. Oh, that's not a credible witness, so we just can't use it. Really? Well, we don't like Jeremy Reynolds. He's got a bad attitude. He doesn't like the church, so just throw his shit out. You know? Oh, so-and-so. He's, you know... Oh, that girl, oh, she came home early from her mission, so she's lying that the mission president raped her. Okay? Sorry. They just tried to discredit people. Adolf Hitler did some things that were right. You know? It doesn't mean that everything you say is wrong. Sometimes they might say something true on LDS.org. You never know. You have to do your research, and I try to make that easy on my website, and I will have one up on Mormon womanizing. It's not polygamy, it's not plural marriage necessarily with Joseph Smith, it's womanizing. It's exploitation, and with Brigham Young, it was filthy, and it was polygamy at times, but an evil polygamy for sure. So, that's why Brian Hales went after Zelf on the Shelf. Because that's his job. Discredit people. That's his job. Discredit people. So, I Googled that, and what did I find? I found results. Zelf on the Shelf, they're there. They're pretty high up in the ratings on their website, so they're a target. Bursting the Bubble, Meridian Magazine, and the Brethren not taking polls. Zelf on the Shelf. So when you start making waves, you get attacked by the LDS apologists. They attack your credibility. That's what they did to Jeremy Reynolds. It's what they do constantly. And then they say, pray about it. Jesus will tell you, and if he didn't, you must not be worthy. Well, that's it, people. That's about all I got to say today on this subject, and now I got to go out and make some money. Coming soon, women, whiskey, and wine, and a few dozen more women. In the meantime, read what Joseph H. Jackson had to say in his sworn affidavit. Read Sarah Pratt. And look at some of these sites. Mormon thinks a good one on that in UTLM. Dodger game out. Hope that helps.